Hello, and welcome to the Momentum Ministry Partners podcast. This podcast is designed to provide that momentum in our God-given roles of leadership as we partner together to equip today's Christian leaders for tomorrow's opportunities. Thank you so much, and we hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello, and welcome to another Momentum Ministry Partners podcast. My name's Eric Miller, and I'll be your host on today's episode. We have an awesome conversation. We're probably going to have this be a two-parter. So I have with me Lori Bohr, is a licensed clinical counselor with a focus on trauma therapy. She's a chaplain with Pastor Dale Henneman. He's been on the podcast before. Pastor Dale is I don't know, what did you say? He's the head of he's the founder, he's the president, He's
the all-encompassing guru / boss / mentor.
Yeah.
He's really taken me through this whole career process. So I'm very grateful, but he has all the degrees and comes from pastoring, and now he's integrated everything and has this amazing ministry.
Yeah. So Pastor Dale actually connected me with you. Pastor Dale was my counselor for a while. I saw him when we moved to Akron, Ohio. So he's over at Community Chaplain Services. You have joined him on staff there. You did 15 years of prison work and prison ministry. That's amazing and impressive. You're married. How long have you been married?
22 years.
Wow. Okay.
22 years.
That's awesome.
Yes.
And you have 3 teenage children. All right.
15 to 18. So
you're in the thick of it, Lori. You are like, probably like prime target audience for our listeners. So you have that like ministry side. You're a parent of teenagers. That's kind of really what we think of the aim for this podcast, and really any of our conversations around Momentum Ministry Partners. We say we want to partner with the local church to help provide those equipping experiences in an effort to raise up this generation's leadership in the local church. And so this conversation is really kind of with that in mind. We want to address today parents and help you navigate the world of parenting teenagers. If you're a parent of a teenager, I actually am not, but I was a youth pastor for a very long time, so I can understand a little bit. That does count. I think so, yeah. It is challenging. Can we just say that? Like, can we just lead with that?
It is challenging. I have to say today, I'm the teacher and the audience
all
at the same time.
There you go. So if no one listens to this, it's just for you and me.
I'm listening.
And I think it will add tremendous value to our lives because of that. Parenting children in general is hard, especially when you're like, I'm a new parent and I don't know if I'm ready for all this. And then you kind of get the hang of it. You like get them out of diapers and they're learning how to do things on their own. I'm in that stage right now. My kids are still like, Dad, I brushed my teeth today. I'm like, excellent. All 3 of them, because you lost all.
That's right.
My son has no front teeth right now. But those are things that, like, when you get into then the teenage years, you're like, wow, this is a roller coaster ride. There are days where I love you, and there are days where you're so precious and sweet, and our conversation is amazing. And then it's like something happens. And the flip gets switched, and you're like, who are you? Are you even my child anymore? So it is terrifying at times, and there are seasons of that, and there are things that we just really want to encourage you in this conversation. And so we're going to talk about how do you parent in seasons of health, and how do you parent and navigate that in seasons of crisis?
Yes, because there's both at any given moment. I like to call the elementary school age the honeymoon phase.
That's good.
Because they start to play sports and they start to have great conversations with you, and the parents are the friends, and they can listen and be corrected, and they start to grow and it's fun. And then all of a sudden, this change comes in, like a shift in the wind comes in, right, into 13, 14 plus into teenage years. And it's actually, I'll talk about it today, it's a very positive developmental phase, that pushback, that what we look at as a crisis, but more of an opportunity of like they're growing into amazing young adults. And if we can parent that in a specific way, it's actually amazing to watch them push back and learn and become their own person.
Nice. So when does that kind of pivot? When does that shift from like late elementary years into like adolescence. It's probably different for boys and girls, but talk about that like transition period into the teenage years.
So from personal experience, I've noticed that it is different between girls and boys. I have 2 girls and a boy, and my boy's in the middle. So with the girls, the peer relationships start to really shift in middle school, like 12, 13, 14. We almost look at them as tribes, like who's going to be excommunicated on what day and who's going to be in this friendship group. And there's a lot of shifting going around. And there's a purpose behind that. But boys are more tactile and they don't hold grudges and they're playful and they have all these connections with other boys in a very tangible, tactile way. Yeah. And so it can look very different because boys will come along a little bit later, 15, 16, with some struggles, freshman, sophomore year. You might see some emotional struggles in boys, and then they'll really come out of it 17, 18. As to with girls, it can be 13 to 15, you know.
A sliding scale.
It's a sliding scale, and it's amazing and terrifying all at once. It just, you can't put any teenager in a box.
Yep. Yeah. And then, so in that age range, okay, what things are you saying that's going on, or have you seen or experienced that's going on in their brain, their chemical, like there's all kinds of scientific research behind this, but even how does that affect their personality, their spiritual growth, their maturity, their emotional understanding? Like, talk about that whole process some.
Yeah, it's a really in-depth process that's going on in their brain. We have what we call the prefrontal cortex, which is the logic side, the reasoning side, the one that can weigh out danger and risk and make maybe better decisions. That's why some teenagers, they're high risk for a purpose, you know, and so we have that. And because the prefrontal cortex is not as active as adults, they will respond in deeper, more intense emotional ways to what we might think is a neutral situation, like, hey, we need you to clean your room, and all of a sudden there's this explosion. Well, they're super active in their amygdala. So I'm going to get a little sciencey here. So in the limbic system, we carry core memories, trauma, you know, very emotional right brain reactions in the amygdala. That's very active for teenagers more than adults. Yeah. And the prefrontal, the logical, is not as active. It flip-flops in adulthood. And so what we see is like, wow, they are so emotional. It's like a roller coaster. It's actually serving a purpose, because as their prefrontal cortex develops by age 25, they're going to shift. And so not panicking, right, when there's that change in mood and shifts several times a day, especially for young girls, you know. Yeah. And then they have, developmentally, they have this idea of identity confusion. Identity confusion is, who am I in the world? Who am I in God's world? If they're following Jesus, right? They start to ask all those questions, and they start to be influenced by the culture and by the cultural shifts, and especially with social media, it's just bigger and bigger around them. And so they're moving in this very turbulent time, trying to figure out, but they're connecting with peers because their goal is to separate from parents by adulthood, to differentiate from their parents and become adults. And so what good advice are you getting from your peers? Probably not always good, sometimes great advice, but they're really not trying to lean on us for, this is where they think we're old and we don't know what we're doing and we've never been a teenager before, you know? And so
Every parent's nodding right now.
That's right, and that's developmentally appropriate. That's a good sign that they are maturing at a rate what they should be in their teenage years. And then you add abstract thought. And abstract thought says, I'm not sure I can be a firefighter. All those dreams you have as a young kid, a young girl or boy, of, you know, being the president of the United States and being on Broadway and all these things, these dreams that you have this thought process that comes in teenage years that says, I don't know if I can do that. And they start to become more realists in their life around them. Well, that enters in self-doubt and low self-esteem, but also a very natural part of developmental phase. And so we move from correction as parents to influence around 13, 14. And if we can't make that shift as parents, then we can be suffocating to them. And then you get the pushbacks even harder because they're just trying to pull away in order to become an adult. And that's all, you know, research-based, psychological, but you see it play out, you know, and you see in God's word, you know, people at 14, 15, 16 were very effective for God's kingdom. They were having babies and marrying and all these things. And now we're expecting that at 24, 25. So imagine what it's like to feel a sense and need of meaning and purpose at that age, but not being allowed to go and search it out because of the parents kind of overjoining over parenting. And so that can be turbulent as well. And this is all healthy stuff. I'm not talking about crisis at all. This
We haven't
is
even
very
got to that
healthy.
part yet.
We haven't got to crisis. So you want to, as parents, you move from correction to influence, and they're moving from parents to peers. And peers can be youth group leaders. And, we want to expose them to amazing peers. And we want to kind of watch the circles that they're in at school and things like that.
Yeah. So Lori, I want to kind of press in on that point a little bit more. As I'm listening to you share, I think it's super easy in this context to listen to what you just said and go, yep, all that makes sense. I've heard that before. But
Theoretically.
in the day-to-day, like so even put your parent hat on, put like mama bear hat on, like in those moments where you do say like, hey, can you help clean up the house? Like we're going to get chores done or whatever it is. And you get that, like that mood swing, that thing that kicks in. Like, how do you remind yourself in that moment? Like, okay, like prefrontal cortex and all these, the amygdala, like how do you remind yourself of the truth of what you just said in the daily life of living with a teenager?
Sometimes I absolutely don't.
Okay,
sometimes I miss the mark all the time.
Sure.
But I found that by reading particular books, like a lot of this is from Dr. Dan Siegel, who does a lot of teenage brain stuff.
Yeah.
Clinically significant, not necessarily surrounded around Jesus, but like great stuff. And I can learn all of those things and then be reactionary in the moment. So there's a whole world going on inside of me that is very turbulent. And I'm modeling calm in my nervous system for them who's really dysregulated. And so when I don't,
Yep.
I can yell or I can raise the bar, right? They can raise the bar and then I can raise the bar. And when we do that, we're not winning anymore.
Yeah.
We're not winning anyway, right? And so to look at that and to regulate yourself is to maybe turn outward for support from others and prepare. Like having this knowledge prepares me to have more understanding and empathy for, her feeling blindsided. Like Dr. Lehman would say, he does a lot of parenting books. He would say, as long as they're going up the stairs to do their work and they're stomping and they're huffing and puffing, we don't have to fight that as long as the goal is they are going up to clean their room,
Right.
So it's letting go of the little things. But I've been preparing because it's just my job because I have a lot of teenage clients. So I have the luxury of just digging in and reading and discerning what is right and true for my family. And I would say that legwork, if that legwork can be done during the elementary school years, we can be more prepared, but we still are going to react in a way that is inappropriate at times too, right?
Sure. Yeah. I think even understanding, like, I like what you just said about, like, as long as they're moving in the right direction, let's pick the right battles to fight. But I think the other thing that even in that is like being mindful of this is a season. This isn't forever. This like emotional swing is, and maybe like I've learned in working with teenagers a lot, like maybe it's helping them even sort through that. All right, I'm sensing you're pretty frustrated right now. Is something else going on? Or are you just mad that I'm asking you to do this thing?
Right.
And helping them walk through that, because I think you're right. Like they don't have the ability to always like anchor in the foundational, concrete, abstract thinking. And so asking good questions may even help them learn how to do that or identify what's really going on in their heart or their mind in that moment.
I think that's so good. And I think most of the time something else is going on and we're pulling their attention out, especially with social media and phones and video games. The attention span is so short, and really trying to pull that out of them.
Yeah.
We can be pulling them out of this deep thought and we're, expecting them to pivot and turn in that moment.
Right.
That's not always fair. I mean,
Right.
I don't feel that way when someone's like, hey, and I'm working on something. It's like, hey, I need you to go do this right now. It's like, my card goes up too.
Yep.
But I have that cortex to regulate and to be able to respond.
Because even understanding like our own perspective, there might be outside stressors that are causing us to snap and respond the way. And
Usually.
then we spiral when, when
Usually,
we get
yes.
the attitude from the teenager. All right,
Yes.
so let's talk then. How does this all affect for the Christ following students, for those of us who are believers? We want to disciple. I believe strongly that the parents should be the primary discipler of their children, right? That's
good.
not
Yes.
really the role for your pastor, your youth pastor, the church. They're part of that for sure.
That's right.
But you, as mom and dad, are the primary discipler. So how does this whole process affect a teenager's spiritual walk as they're pivoting, as they're learning, as their brain is functioning and forming? What does that look like?
Let me go back for a minute to, I want to say one more thing because it's going to eat at me.
Perfect. Yeah.
Sleep is super important for
that's
kids. So I
good.
want to go back to the healthy,
Yeah,
to
yeah,
that
yeah.
last question.
Yeah.
Sleep is very active at this time because it's the prefrontal cortex grow. There's so much brain development. Sleeping until 10, 11 o'clock is not a bad thing when they can because they're not just sleeping and being lazy. Like the brain is actively moving and growing and cellular and all these things are important. So I just want to put that out there as far as health. Let them have their basic needs, good food, sleeping in. You know, productivity is also important. You want that balance between it. But I would say like those basic needs are super important in the teenage
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
And now I'll shift to the spiritual.
No, that's
thinking.
really
Does
good.
that make sense?
I'm actually glad you said that. Every teenager is going to come listen to this and pull that clip out and just show it to their parents now.
I let my kids
See?
sleep in till noon
See?
on a Saturday.
See, Mom? I
Yeah.
can sleep in.
That's right.
Miss Lori said.
It's a very active process. It is not laziness.
Good.
So
Good.
laziness is maybe 2 or 3 p.m.
For sure.
And not working and not
For
engaging
sure.
in life. That's different, right? We'll
Yeah.
talk about that when
Yeah.
we get to crisis. So spiritual discipleship, you're right. You're so spot on. Like it happens in the family and you build a team around you.
Yeah.
Where I've texted youth pastors of, my son and daughter's like, hey, they're struggling with this. Can you just like touch point with them at youth group tonight? And they will. And it's just casual and safe. And it's something they probably wouldn't talk to me about, but they'll talk to them about. And we've really worked hard on putting those safe people around them. Like my kids did Bible quizzing and their coach for years is now my son's youth leader.
That's
and
awesome.
they have such a relationship where he's a part of our team, and it's very important. And so it's important to let them in on the discipleship, but the leading of your kids and the modeling of your kids happens at home.
Yeah.
And, it moves from that corrective experience. You can translate that spiritually as well. Maybe you're not, throwing scripture at them and truth at them all the time, but you might be connecting with them and say, hey, when I was a teenager, this is how God showed up for me, or this is how I wish God would have shown up for me, where you're starting to influence them and be, real with them. You want to protect and sanctify some of your past trauma, but also to be able to filter it and be able to say like, hey, this is normal. This is common. Like, and this is how God showed up for me, or this is, how do you think God's showing up for you? And asking those open questions, because this is the time where if they don't start owning their own following of Jesus Christ,
Yeah.
that's when they fall off in college because they're blindsided. So they're so sheltered in the home, and then they go off to college and the culture just swallows them up, and the teaching swallows them up.
Yeah.
Esther, if they can work out their own salvation during that time and decide what they believe about it and question what maybe they don't believe and have safe people to ask that, especially younger, like college age or youth leaders, wow, will that take you far in college life and discipleship,
Yeah.
And so I would say walking that corrective but more influential, walking alongside, sharing life, asking the questions and digging in together, but not having the answers for them all the time and feeling the pressure to have the answers for them. Because if I don't have the answers, then maybe I'm not as faithful as they think I am,
Gotcha.
But like, hey, let's dig into this together. What do you think about looking up this and what, and joining them in a search for their true anchored belief in Jesus.
So, Lori, that's I love that. Let's go a little deeper. What does that look like? How do you, as a parent, for your student, you're like, I want that, I long for that, and if students are honest, they probably do too. Mm-hmm. They just don't know how to ask for it. And I think as parents, we're afraid. We always think, I think maybe it's human nature that we always assume the worst. We hope for the best, but we assume the worst. So as parents, we assume our kids don't want to talk to us about spiritual things. They don't want to talk to us about hard topics. They don't want to bring their questions. And we stop there. It allows us to, it paralyzes us. Our children think my parents aren't going to know anything about this. And so it paralyzes them. How do you hold space to like bridge that gap and alleviate that like distance that's being driven between parents and teenagers?
And think about what you're actually describing. You're describing a youth that doesn't quite have the answers, and they're not sure their parents have the answers. And isn't that the truth of what's going on? Like, aren't we always searching for answers, like this side of heaven? So, like, why not get honest about that?
We actually all are. Yeah.
Why not get honest about that and go, yeah, let's acknowledge there is a gap. Let's close it together.
Yeah.
And let's ask the questions together. And modeling, it's hard. It's hard for us. In my ministry, I pray with my clients. I do these things that are so evident that my kids don't get to see at home. And then I'm busy and we go. So I miss the mark on modeling for them my faith. And my husband misses the mark. But when tough things come up, we turn to Jesus. And I have 3 kids with 3 different levels of belief right now. And one is like, oh, okay, you're going to Momentum? Yes. And the other one is like, in Philly and this and that. And it's truly a part of his, and another one is she's moving into college and figuring out what she believes. They're all okay where they're at. If I panic about that, they sense that, right?
True.
But where they're all figuring out their own faith and how that looks. And if we can just anchor it and say that it's Jesus, and not in a way where we panic and try to overjoin with them or correct them in any way, but like to kind of watch them take those risks of faith and ask those questions of cultures. Like, it's pretty hard to not say, well, this is what you should believe.
Right.
They're going to you surround them with mentors, safe mentors and stuff. They're going to work it out whether you want them to or not.
I like that a lot. Yeah. I think keeping right perspective in that, and even ask, again, we say this a lot on this podcast, but to ask good questions, like, and parents, like, hear me, it's okay to not have all the answers. I don't know is an acceptable answer, but don't just leave it there. I love what you're saying, like, follow up, like, let's figure that out together.
Yes.
Is that okay? Like, let's go talk to somebody together who might know, or like, there's a new thing called the internet now. Like, maybe you've heard, like, let's go Google it. Like, let's learn together. That can be such a beautiful picture of helping bridge that gap in that distance of like the gap that sometimes parents feel with their kids and students feel with their parents.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And I
like
think
that
it's
a
so
lot.
important to not fake it.
Yep.
Because teenagers can smell that a mile away.
they're-
So if you don't have the answer, you say, I don't know, they'll respect that. They won't respect you having this lofty kind of idealized answer. And they're like, that's not what I was looking for because this is my struggle over here.
Right.
They're going to sense that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So all of this is kind of in a context of what we would call health, right?
That's right.
And all of this is normal. So all of these things that we're kind of describing, the like figuring out your identity, making your faith and your relationship with Jesus your own, making sense of the world, right? Like learning how to navigate adult things or being responsible and productive, and you're growing, your body's transitioning. All these things are normal everyday factors in a healthy teenager. Like, that's a big deal to like kind of put that in context. So any teenager that is struggling with relationships or their identity, maybe they got cut from the sports team or they didn't make it, and that's a identity thing for them. Like, well, who am I now? That was my, or a relationship that ended, their best friend moves away or whatever. All of those things are normal. You're saying
That's right.
That's normal. That's healthy.
That's healthy. It's healthy.
Good.
Because I want my kids to work that out in my house.
Yeah.
I don't want them to go work that out in the world, in the culture, in a big university where they're soaking up all these different voices around them. Let them find their own voice under your protection. But your protection has to be flexible.
So you're kind of creating that greenhouse environment where they can grow before they're going to go get planted and rooted in the real world.
Yes.
Yeah.
And ways that you can really provide that space, that safe space to do that, like that greenhouse. I love that analogy of the greenhouse, is like the funnel effect of parenting, where the younger they are, right? The more you're letting go, the older they get, the more you're letting them kind of spread their wings and figure out based on trust and the trust they've earned and the trust that you're earning from them,
Good.
And then there's the mutual respect piece, right? It's hard when you're being yelled at all the time to feel respected.
Yep.
And so if you think about like, how would an adult talk to me, and would I be offended if they talk to me in that tone, then your teen deserves that type of tone as well, right? So we can forget that. I can forget that,
True.
Parents try not to take things personally. To be so hurt by them not wanting to talk to you or not wanting to spend time with you, or they're in their room all the time and things like that. Try not to take that personally as if they don't love you. No, they do come back around. They do come back around.
Yeah.
And catching those moments where it feels good to be connected and sharing that, wow, that was so fun that you went to that movie with us. That was really good. Can we do that again soon?
Yeah.
Instead of like, you're always in your room. Why don't you come down?
Right.
Let's not focus on the negative.
Aggressive.
Yes, let's praise the positive,
Yeah.
And there's a really good acronym, and this is by Dr. Dan Siegel too. It's PART. And PART is we can be present, and being present is just physically being with them in the room, and we can attune, which means attunement means that we are listening and we're understanding and we're empathizing with what they're going through. R is for resonate. Find the deeper meaning of what's going on, understand them and help them navigate their deeper meaning and purpose in life, and then create trust, right? Create trust within the relationship. And that means that funnel effect, letting them go, And if I can't stress this enough, repair the ruptures.
Yeah.
Repair the ruptures. They do not need to always come and apologize for their bad behavior. If we can repair the rupture, we don't have to agree to repair. We don't have to have everything all hunky-dory and we're moving through and everything's great. We can repair and say, I know we disagree on this, but hey, our love isn't fragile.
Yeah.
Hey, kid, our love isn't fragile. And that repairing of ruptures is so important, and they will take it into their families
True.
and the workplace and everywhere else.
I like that acronym. Say that one more time. PART.
Present, attune, resonate, and create trust.
I like that.
And that's from the book's called Brainstorm. It's an amazing book, kind of sciencey.
Yeah.
But Dr. Dan Siegel has a lot of great terms for the teenage brain, and
I think that's such a good process, because one of the things that I tried to encourage parents a lot with when I was a youth pastor, and I still use this from time to time, but there's this concept of like, we're not looking for behavior modification. The goal is like heart change.
That's right.
And so that's kind of what you're saying. Like, this PART acronym is a process to help you do that.
That's right.
And so if you really dive deep and understand like what you're giving us here, this tool, and even the context of this conversation, like, these are things to be reminded of. You are the parent.
That's right.
You are the authority.
You're the influencer.
Yeah, God chose, like, this is wild to think about, but like, God chose your children to be in your home. Like, children, teenagers listening to this, God chose you to be in the family that you have for a reason. Like, that's
unique to your family.
Yeah, and that's actually what you need. That's like a gift to you. And you may not, as teenagers, you're going to go through seasons where you don't like your parents. As parents, you're going to go through, maybe it's called the teenage years, where you don't really like your kids a lot. Like, there's times, if we're
Human
honest,
nature.
like, for sure.
Yes.
But this like understanding that you're the parent, you're the spiritual God-given authority over them, the primary one. And so you need to play, I'm going to do a pun off. You need to play your part.
That's right.
So be present, attune, resonate, and create trust. That's really good.
And
that's really
this
good.
is what Jesus did.
Yeah.
In the gospel, right?
Yeah.
That's what he did in the gospel.
All right. So as we maybe transition into thinking about crisis, every student right now, there's one thing that kind of happened that we would almost be remiss if we left out in this conversation. Understanding that every student right now is that what we just described is healthy. That's normal. That's a growing, learning, developing teenager, how we parent, we need to be mindful of that, be patient with that. I like what you're saying, model and mirror that to them.
Yes.
But Lori, the other thing is, like, every teenager on the face of the earth right now just went through a pandemic, and so did we. And the things that in their late adolescence that they thought they knew, like the world that they thought they knew and understood and lived in, got shifted and turned upside down. So can you just talk about that for a minute? Like, how did the global pandemic affect teenagers' development now? Where, like, when we were teenagers, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have social media, we didn't have some of those things. But, like, the pandemic changed a whole lot of things. I'm sure you have thoughts about this. Talk a little bit about what did that cause?
Yeah, so we could do a podcast.
I'm sure.
How we parented the pandemic and what's happening now. You know, statistically, increase of 37% of mental health in high school.
Wow.
Reports of mental health in high schoolers to their school counselors, right? 44% of teens reported depression, sadness, 2020. They were not made for isolation. They were made to differentiate, that's what we say clinically, to move away and individuate and become their own people. 14, 15, 16, they're learning that.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing ramifications. I mean, in adults, they're talking about having an anxiety screening for your physical well check every year now, because there has been so much insurance paid to anxiety that they're starting to look at, like, hey, if we can do some preventative, because it's a global thing. And so, like, if you look at the nervous system level, none of us knew how to acclimate to a pandemic. It's not stored in our brain anywhere. It's not stored in our nervous system. It's a threat we did not know how to identify or respond to.
Yeah.
That's why you saw all the extreme responses, and we're still seeing extreme, dual thoughts on what we think was right or wrong in the government. And that nervous system response is so hard for a teenager who is isolated, and the time when they should be surrounded by their peers and taking some risks and going out and seeing what work is and productivity is, they were shut in, and depression just skyrocketed with teenagers, and suicidal ideation and thoughts and addictions and all these things happen because it just put a complete break in their developmental journey.
For sure.
More than adults.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think it's important to remember we were created to be in relationship. That's our human nature. And so when everything shifted, we got put in a place of isolation, loneliness. Our primary means of communication or even relationship was forced almost digitally, or
Zoom,
technology and online. And so for parents to keep in mind, and I think you're kind of alluding to this too, like the big piece for students, a lot of them do relationships socially on their phone anyways, on a device. They're comfortable talking through text or by, typing something out, and they're not always good at face-to-face anyways. That's natural and normal.
That's right.
And yet, when their schooling and their education got put on that platform and via text or via technology, now what we're seeing is there are students that actually don't want to have anything to do with some of this. And as statistics come out about the mental health and the anxiety and the panic and the depression and all those things, now you're seeing students begin to even watch their parents, even watch mom and dad being addicted to a device or their computer or their phone. And I think we're starting to now see students that are like, no, I don't actually want a phone, or I don't need social media. And they're craving, naturally speaking, because shocker, this is how God designed us, to have meaningful, intimate relationships with each other. Would you say that's accurate?
I think it's so spot on. And you're saying, and so the clinical turn to that is our nervous system. The first safe base we have as humans is God has designed this amazing reciprocity in us. And reciprocity is a give and take. And it starts in the ocular muscles. It starts around the eye muscles.
I knew you would have scientific terms for
Yes.
this.
So as we, sorry, I'm very sciencey.
I love it.
Yeah. So as we like smile at each other, and that's the first phase of safety to a nervous system, and that does not happen on social media or on phones.
Yeah.
And so even texting, you ever text and they don't respond right away, and there's this sense of anxiety because you feel like maybe you said the same thing, because the wrong thing, because you don't know about the tone and all these things. Well, because God gave us this, sense of connection and relationship, this intense desire for that, and he does it physically through the eye muscles, and we don't have that reciprocity, that even getting a text late can cause a threat to our nervous system. And so now all of our nervous systems are almost misfiring because we didn't know how to store the trauma of a pandemic. We'd never experienced one, so now our trauma brains have to figure it all out and adjust. But our nervous systems are still recovering.
Yep.
So you look at a freshman. I had a freshman who is probably about a year later in a little social development because she was isolated for a year. And so you look at those teenagers, we need to hold space for that development, that natural teenage development might be stunted for a year or two, which means they may not be ready to launch.
Yep.
And it may be something very deep inside them that has been affected by the pandemic.
Wow. All right. So, Lori, let's kind of press pause right there.
Okay.
Because I feel like that's a good stopping point for this conversation. That this is kind of part one. This is as we look at like the health perspective of teenagers. Parents, as you're listening to this conversation, if you're like, my children aren't yet in that teenage year, and you're like, do you have anything that could be helpful as I prepare for that? We actually do. We have a podcast that we did last year with Jeff Bogue and I, and we talked about prepared parenting. What are things to be mindful of in that younger adolescent years? And that was very, very helpful. That was a very popular downloaded episode. But go back, that's season 1, episode 10. I was trying to look somewhere in the teens of season 1. It's called Prepared Parenting. And then even for your students that we want these conversations to be a resource. We mentioned Pastor Dale, the counselor that you work with, that we did a 2-parter last year with him in season 1. It's I found this episode 34 and 35, but we talked about how do you identify anxiety and depression? What are the differences between the two? How do they connect and relate to each other? And then how do you help students overcome in regards to that? So we're going to go in part 2 of this a little bit of a different direction and walking with your teenagers through crisis. What do you do when all of these things that are natural, normal, and healthy hit, and then the major blowout happens? So, Lori, thank you for this conversation. It's super helpful.
You're
to
welcome.
our listeners, tune into the next part of this conversation. That'll do it for this episode today. Please check back next week for part 2 as we talk through crisis. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Well, guys, I think that's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. We'd be really honored if you went ahead and subscribed to the podcast, and that way you can just kind of stay up to date with the episodes that we're posting in the future. To learn more about Momentum Ministry Partners and our many other resources, please be sure to follow us on social media at Momentum Ministry Partners, or check out our website, www.buildmomentum.org.